Welcome to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast, where each week we speak with brands, icons, innovators, and trailblazers within the fly fishing industry, exploring both the successes and failures they've encountered along the way to become who they are today. But first, if you have not yet subscribed to the podcast or joined our email list, please do so by going to the flyfisherinsiderpodcast.com, or you can also find us on Instagram at Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. Now let's begin. Welcome to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. Today our guest is Ty Churchwell. Ty is the Trout Unlimited Colorado Public Land Program Mining Coordinator. He's here today to tell us about the many projects that he's working on. So Ty, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to be here with you today.
We always give the opportunity to any TU members. So, and you guys are doing such good work over there. So, before we get into your role, the project that you're working on, the reports that you guys are creating and working on as well, tell us a bit about how you got involved with TU and what your role as a mining coordinator is over there.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm a trout angler first and foremost. It is a passion that I developed as a child, and it remains today. And I'm very passionate about conservation issues, and in particular those that have impacts on trout and salmon fisheries in public lands. And really the vast majority of my work is centered around federal mining policy, and that's what we're here to discuss today.
Crazy. Federal mining policy. It sounds like a lot of red tape. But how did you get involved? Take me back to when you started at TU.
Yeah, I started out in as a volunteer at my local chapter here in Durango, Colorado, about 15 years ago, and an opportunity became available here in town at the office for Trout Unlimited to get involved in public land conservation work, and I made a career shift and have found my place here at Trout Unlimited, and it is with great joy that I get to work on conservation issues important to hunters and anglers on a daily basis.
Perfect. And as the mining coordinator, you said you deal with mining issues and mining concerns. What are some of the concerns in mining that you've encountered here? And I know you have the project that we're going to talk about here, but what is it that you guys do? What with that role? Outline a few of the details.
Yeah, that's a great question. Historic mining, legacy mining from the late 1800s and early 1900s still have major impacts to water quality, particularly in the West. And so really a great deal of my work is centered around addressing issues associated with water quality and as a function of old historic mines. I'm sure you and your listeners will recall the Gold King mine spill of 2015 in the Animas River here in Durango, Colorado. The EPA was performing a remediation project in the headwaters of the Animas and suffered an accident where 3 million gallons of ugly orange water flowed down the Animas River, and it was an incredibly visible event in today's world of instant media. Pictures of the Gold King spill circulated around the planet in mere minutes. And so a good part of what I do here in Durango is leading the Superfund cleanup. And to be clear, the citizens' engagement function of the Superfund cleanup that's occurring in the headwaters of the Animas River, including the Gold King spill. Additionally, I work on federal mining policy. We're going to be talking today about critical minerals, and we can dive into that with a little more detail here in a moment. But I'm also working with other TU staff and stakeholders on Good Samaritan legislation. This effort is intended to increase capacity of abandoned mine cleanups and is a policy that is being developed to provide a legal mechanism by which third-party entities, such as Trout Unlimited, can perform abandoned mine cleanups, whereby improving water quality that's been impacted by historic mining.
Interesting. And, being in Canada, and we talk about abandoned mines, and I was reading an article the other day just with the oil prices and whatnot about orphaned wells or abandoned wells. And I know in Canada we have a ton of abandoned mines. And I guess I never really took a moment and thought about all that water and all that contaminated water. Like, it just sits there. It does just sit there. And I guess that's, a big part of, and I'm glad people like you are out there, like, advocating for waterways due to to this mining. And it's just crazy to think. I mean, I never put it into perspective, but I guess we're gonna jump right into it. So Ty, you mentioned that you worked on a critical minerals report, and with the critical minerals report, I mean, what are some critical minerals? First of all, let's jump into the basics.
Well, let's do. First of all, it should be noted that there's a definition for critical minerals as defined by the Department of Interior here in the United States, and really that's what brought us to this place of working on this issue was our current administration's push to develop critical minerals. I'm going to read you the definition here because I think that really outlines how this issue is viewed. By definition, a critical mineral is a non-fuel mineral or mineral material essential to the economic and national security of the United States, the supply chain of which is vulnerable to disruption and that serves an essential function in the manufacture of a product, the absence of which would have significant consequences for our economy and our national security. So that's the definition as defined by the administration, and these are really important minerals, in particular in 21st century world. I certainly could name off many of them, and in particular would point to minerals such as lithium, cobalt, aluminum, uranium, and rare earth elements. Those are just a few of the critical minerals that meet the definition developed by the Department of Interior. And there is a full list of critical minerals that's been developed. In total, the U.S. government has identified 56 elements that meet the criteria or the definition of a critical mineral, and so that is really the focus of our work is on those 56 minerals.
Okay, so you're focused on these minerals, and you're focused what on these minerals exactly? In the preservation of the waterways after the mining?
Well, yes, that is a part of it. Really, the crux of this issue is that the supply chain of these minerals is vulnerable to disruption. Of all the critical minerals on the critical minerals list, the U.S. is import reliant on 35 of those minerals, and for 14 of them, we are completely reliant on countries outside the United States for those resources. So this is very much a supply chain concern. As I just noted, many of these minerals are not mined, processed, or developed here in the United States, and we are subject to import vulnerability or supply chain vulnerability because we're not producing these minerals at home. That really is the push by the current administration, is to do what we can to eliminate the vulnerability and potential disruptions to the supply chain. And so the administration is pursuing a set of objectives and a course of action to do more domestic production of these minerals, more mining as one path forward to resolving the supply chain issues. But then there are a host of other actions for which they are pursuing.
Crazy. So a ton of content in there that I need to dig on, Chai. So basically, when you say disrupting the supply chain, what, like, again, at a basic level, so that we can understand, like, how are we trying to disrupt it? Like, what is being disrupted? What are the ramifications of that? And then why? Yeah. Let's jump on a basic level. I know, I know my do it for myself, not so much the listeners, but for myself. Let's say that.
Yeah, the vulnerability to supply chain is really from other countries. As an example, for many of these minerals that we're talking about here today, we are reliant on other countries, and in particular, China. We're beholden to them, and were it not for their supply of many of these minerals, we would have no supply whatsoever in the United States. And so, as you can well imagine, working with a foreign government, in particular China and others, where trade agreements and concerns exist, we run the risk of not having supplies of these critical minerals if for one reason or another, a government were to limit or cease supplying these minerals to the United States for domestic production. Additionally, I'll use cobalt as an example. Much of the cobalt that we use in the United States for manufacturing is brought in from other countries. It's imported, and a great deal of cobalt production occurs in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. They're at times not a stable government and not a reliable source of cobalt. Additionally, many of these countries that we import these critical minerals from lack good or sufficient environmental labor laws. And so, yes, we can get these minerals from other countries, but they may be being mined in a manner that we don't find agreeable, in particular those without environmental laws.
Great clarity. I just picture that movie Blood Diamond. It's the same concept, right? Where, like you mentioned, the countries do have that different standards or different ideas of how they would extract the minerals. So how does TU?
Yeah,
go ahead.
You're absolutely correct. I was just going to point out, in particular with cobalt, many people do make the connection that's very much like Blood Diamond. Unfortunately, that country has been accused of labor law infractions, and in particular child labor. So it's concerning for our country that has a moral compass to be buying minerals from a country that does not have adequate labor laws or environmental laws. And then again, there are import concerns from countries that we just have disagreements with in terms of trade policy.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's good for us to point this out. So I want to get it down even further. So when we talk about cobalt, uranium, lithium, any of those minerals that are coming from other countries, how does this affect me or a listener? How does it affect my daily life? What's a product that's going to make it impact or affect my daily life? So I'm going to take notice and go, oh, wow, we better do something.
Yeah, that's a really great point to elevate here. In fact, that is the issue. As the definition describes, these minerals are vitally important to 21st century living. And in particular, a shift to green energy and climate change mitigation strategies. As an example, lithium and cobalt are key components to renewable energy production and storage. And so in terms of battling climate change and moving to a more green energy system, these minerals are incredibly important. Additionally, high-tech industries such as cell phones and electric cars and laptops and many of the appliances that we use on a day-to-day basis in the world today, critical minerals are vital components to those types of technologies. So the very phone that you use to get the get the morning news or whatever the case may be, these critical minerals are components of those, and the absence of those minerals would mean the absence of technology as we know it today.
Perfect. So I wake up, I go to turn my phone on, it's dead. The battery's dead. I can't get one. I go to jump in my Tesla to drive to my job. I can't get there because the battery's dead. The cobalt door handles aren't working. I get it. That affects me, and that affects everyone that's into those products, which is pretty much everyone. So how does TU?
Yeah.
So
Steve,
yeah, go ahead.
Let me make another point real quick, Greg. There are national security issues as well, and this holds as true for Canadian citizens as it does U.S. citizens. Many of these critical minerals are used in military applications. As an example, uranium is one of the critical minerals, and of course, many of the ships in our Navy use uranium for their fuel source. Many of the critical minerals are used in military applications such as precision-guided weapons and the like. So there are national security implications to these minerals beyond that, which are related more intimately to day-to-day life, such as a cell phone.
Absolutely. Definitely. Good pointing that out. So, Ty, I looked at the report, and from what I saw, it looks like you have these minerals within your own country, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we do. One of the first things that Trout Unlimited did as we embarked on this effort last year in mid-2019 was to do a significant amount of mapping to utilize the current USGS layers available through GIS mapping to identify where all these mineral deposits are in relation to the places that hunters and anglers cherish. Those would be, of course, trout and salmon rivers and public lands, particularly in the western United States. So there has been a fairly strong push by the U.S. government to map these mineral resources, and in fact, part of their objectives here in the near future is to further map where these resources are. But really, until Trout Unlimited had overlaid where trout and salmon habitat and public lands reside in proximity to these known deposits, that really had not been mapped before. And so that was really one of the first things that we did last year was do the mapping function so that we could really take a good look at it. After the mapping had been performed and we were able to do an analysis of the overlap of these resources with the places we hold deer, it became pretty evident that this was a conversation that we needed to involve ourselves in. Roughly half of the known critical mineral deposits in the United States reside within cold water habitat for trout and salmon, and roughly 1 in 10 of those deposits are in currently protected public lands, again, most of those being in the western United States.
So do they want to mine those minerals now? Is that like the goal, or are they just at the mapping stage? They've identified where they are. They know they've been in the ground for millions of years. They're not going anywhere. are they proposing any mines? Because that's where the safety really starts beginning. Like is it just an exploration phase? Like where's Trout? Where are you guys? Where's your department focused on, and what are you focused on educating people with now that we've identified that in Western USA there's a ton of minerals that are needed in daily life. Like what are you guys focused on?
Yeah, that's a great question. The current administration obviously had identified this as an issue, and quite frankly, previous administrations had done so as well. This is not a new concern, but it is something that the current administration had elevated, and rightfully so. This is an issue that impacts all citizens in this country, and quite frankly, everyone on the planet.
Correct.
Because again, these minerals are so important to 21st century living. So recognizing that we did not have enough sufficient development and processing of these minerals in this country, and in fact are vulnerable to supply chain disruptions when importing, the administration outlined a number of actions that they intend to pursue to eliminate or mitigate at minimum the supply chain concerns. Mining is part of that equation, but we cannot mine our way out of this problem. There are other actions that we can pursue as a nation to try to resolve these supply chain concerns. As an example, increased technology to deal with mine waste at abandoned mine sites where minerals might be able to be extracted. There's also recycling of minerals that we can pursue, and a number of other actions that are part of the quiver to address these supply chain concerns. But it's really important to note we cannot mine our way out of this problem. There really needs to be a more holistic approach to addressing the issue. And while the current administration has certainly outlined a number of objectives and courses of action that we find agreeable and certainly worth pursuing, again, technological advances and recycling as examples. But there are others that were proposed that can prove quite detrimental, potentially, to trout and salmon habitat and protected public lands.
Can you touch on those that were detrimental to public lands and trout and salmon?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, as I had mentioned a moment ago, roughly half of the deposits are in are in cold water habitat for trout and salmon, and so their mere proximity to those resources cause a bit of alarm. But additionally, some of the objectives that the administration is trying to pursue would be to weaken and roll back some environmental laws that we have in this country associated with mining, to try to streamline permitting processes and get mines up and running sooner and quicker, by rolling back some of these environmental protections that we have in this country. Additionally, they have recommended that places in the United States where protected public lands exist and critical mineral deposits reside within them, as an example, a wilderness area, they are recommending that wilderness areas potentially could be opened up for mining when, in fact, at present, they are currently protected from such activities.
Wow. And you guys are obviously advocating for the preservation of the wilderness areas and the rivers and all that. How are some of the ways that you guys are advocating for that? Are you going to Congress? Are you taking to the streets? Walk me through how you guys are doing that.
Yeah, that's important to note. Again, this was an issue that we felt it important that hunters and anglers engage ourselves in. And part of how we can do that is by educating sportsmen on the issue. in particular, what sorts of actions might put at risk the places where we hunt and fish. Again, many of the objectives that the administration is pursuing, we are in agreement with. Others we are not. And so, to the point of educating, we are releasing a report on critical minerals, and it's a conservation perspective coming from hunters and anglers, in part to educate citizens, elected officials, and decision makers on the issue, but also to outline a course of action that we find more favorable than the one being brought forward by the administration. So within the report are a set of tenets that are being recommended as a more holistic approach to this issue. The tenets that we are recommending certainly are protective of trout and salmon habitat and protected public lands. And so that's really how we intend to educate and embark on the conversation. But going a little bit further then, we're certainly communicating and working with elected officials at the federal level, decision makers, senators, congressmen, and women, and the administration to advance policies that we find more holistic and more responsible in nature. Again, part of how we're going to resolve the supply chain concerns is to perform more mining in this country. But we would be urging, of course, that we pursue those locations that are not putting at risk cold water, trout and salmon habitat, and protected public lands.
Absolutely. Now, how you mentioned that you're going to senators and you're going to your local Congress and all that sort of stuff. What's the reaction from these people? What's the reaction from the government and authorities being like? Has it been receptive to the recommendations that TU has been made? Walk us through that.
Well, yeah, that's a great question. So this is already on the radar of the U.S. federal government. Again, the current administration is already advocating and pursuing certain courses of action. But in particular, Senator Murkowski from Alaska, who is the chair of the Energy and Natural Resource Committee for the Senate, has also identified this as an issue that she and other members of Congress are actively engaged in discussing and bringing forward policies and potential laws to help address this issue. So we're certainly in the process of speaking with and engaging with elected officials in Washington, D.C., who are already quite aware of this issue. So we're not walking into the halls of Congress and speaking with elected officials who are not aware of this problem. This is quite well known, frankly, in the halls of Congress, at least with some members who are deeply engaged in committees or members of committees where these sorts of issues are currently being discussed.
Gotcha. You know, Ty, it seems like it's been an uphill battle, and I mean, I'm glad you guys are out there advocating and doing what you're doing for this. What are some of the challenges like that you faced right now in doing this?
Yeah, well, again, educating is a big part of this. We need to make the American citizens aware of this issue, and it does affect every one of us. And again, not just people who live in the United States, but around the world. I, of course, have no idea the percentage of people who have cell phones, just as an example, but it's incredibly high, and so this is an issue that impacts everyone in terms of 21st century living. Really, what we're advocating for here is that this is a 21st century problem, and it requires 21st century thinking and policies. In this country, we still mine under the 1872 General Mining Act, and that in and of itself poses some concern for us. we're advocating for and bringing forward, again, these tenets that describe a more holistic approach to resolving the supply chain concerns and ensuring that American manufacturers have access to the resources that they need for production of everyday objects and so forth. And so, again, we can't mine our way out of this problem, and the current administration sees that as well. But we really need to take a more holistic approach to this and look well out into the future and do our best to develop policies today that can ensure that these resources are available to American manufacturing and then on down the road with products that are used worldwide.
Do you think a new mining act that's adapted for today's day and age? I mean, we're going back 200 years or plus when that act was written. I mean, 200 years ago, it was a completely different world. And, you know, there was gold rushes and this and there, just everything else. Do you believe that a new mining act, a feasible mining act, a responsible mining act would help?
Well, it certainly would. We would be of the opinion that the 1872 General Mining Act in the United States needs to be amended and updated anyway.
Yeah, fair enough, yeah.
Certainly, yeah, one of the tenets, in fact, for critical minerals, we're recommending that a royalty be placed on critical minerals so that royalties can be collected and put into a mitigation fund, a remediation fund, where we can do a better job in this country of cleaning up abandoned mines from the previous mining rush, if you will, from the late 1800s and early 1900s.
Well, it's funny you say that because I was just going to circle back to that. At the beginning of the conversation, you mentioned that you guys do the restoration of cleaning up abandoned mines. Is there quite a few abandoned mines that are affecting our areas that you guys are involved in cleaning up? Or, I mean, I don't need to get into too much detail about it, but and if so, like, how is it that you're restoring these mines or fixing them back to the natural state?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll answer that real briefly. The Environmental Protection Agency estimates that there are about 500,000 abandoned hard rock mines in the western United States, and roughly 40% of headwater streams in the West are impacted by historic old abandoned mines. That is an issue in and of itself. Certainly new mines in the United States and currently operating mines do so under fairly strict environmental laws, and we can, in fact, mine in this country in a responsible manner whereby water quality is not impacted. Our concern with critical minerals isn't that necessarily that environmental laws won't be followed, though that is one of the courses of action that the administration is pursuing. But that the wrong mine would be developed in the wrong place. Again, there are multiple mineral deposits. I think 822 in total have been mapped in the United States, and if we have choice as a country to mine for a mineral, let's use lithium as an example, in a location that is not impacting protected public lands or put at risk cold water trout and salmon habitat, that's the location that we would prefer be developed.
Of course.
And so again, that's part of what the tenants are recommending. If we need to mine, if that is one of the ways that we're going to address the supply chain concern, and we have some choices to make about where to develop those mines, there are better locations than others, and we would advocate that we pursue those other locations first. Additionally, and as I mentioned a minute ago, we can't fix this by mining alone. There are are a number of ways that we can address these issues potentially without mining at all. And that is our preferred course of action. We do have, as I mentioned, hundreds of thousands of abandoned mines in this country. Those are mines that were developed in the late 1800s up until World War II, roughly, slightly thereafter. Those mines were developed and operated with no laws, no environmental laws. Those mines predated any of our current mining laws, and we're living with those impacts today. And so, where we can, as a third party, non-responsible environmental and conservation organization, we do perform mine cleanup projects at abandoned mines in the United States. Certainly, we target those that are impacting water quality for trout and salmon habitat. But there is only so much we can do under the current laws of the United States. It's actually quite minimal what we can do now, and we would like to do more. And it's not just Trout Unlimited who's interested in performing more abandoned mine cleanups, all with an eye on improving water quality for trout and salmon. So again, as I mentioned at the top of this interview, Good Samaritan legislation is one of those mechanisms that we're pursuing, which would be federal legislation that would help facilitate those abandoned mine cleanups and create a framework by which we could perform those actions.
Mm-hmm. Yep, clearly see that the ramification of that. Ty, you keep mentioning education. You keep circling back to alternative sources. No, like when we look at that, we look at like recycling. I mean, that's the first thing that comes to me. I mean, we have already, the mineral's already been mined, lithium's already been extracted, whatever it is, it's here, it's turned into a product, whether it's a car and we're crushing it and using the metal from that. And you keep mentioning this is like to use, like you make those recommendations that let's look at these options first, right? And you say education, let's educate people on those alternative sources.
Yeah, that's absolutely a good deal of what we're trying to do here. And it's not just American citizens or citizens of the planet in general.
Globally. Yeah.
These critical minerals that we're talking about, several of them, and again, I believe I had mentioned cobalt and lithium, are vitally important to renewable energy production and storage. And so as the planet does a better job of pursuing green energy sources, these critical minerals are going to be vitally important to that. And so it is in everyone's best interest that we ensure that our country and other countries around the globe have access to these mineral resources so that green energy solutions can be pursued and we can move in a more green direction. All, of course, would combat climate change. That by itself is concerning enough, in particular, what climate change impacts are being felt currently today and into the future on trout and salmon habitat.
Ty, couldn't agree more. Here's where I'm going to go with this now. I want to make sure that that Trout Unlimited is getting out every aspect that you want to get out of this podcast by taking that educating those listeners a little bit further. Is there anything else you'd like to mention or touch base on that you feel is critical?
Yeah, I would just point out, and I really already have, is that this is an issue, and by this I mean the minerals that we need for 21st century living. This is an issue that concerns all of us on this planet. Certainly climate change in particular is notable. But it's something that we all need to pay attention to, and in particular in the United States, because we're so beholden to other countries for these resources. There are ways that we can resolve these issues that take a more holistic approach and look at alternatives and other courses of action before we start poking new holes into the earth to mine these products. It's important to national security as well, and I know the Canadians would probably share our concern in terms of the minerals that we need to ensure our national security and military applications. But listen, we love to hunt and fish in this country. They do in Canada as well. And I'm sure those of us who are sportsmen and women will recognize that we need to address these supply chain concerns and ensure that we have access to these mineral resources and we don't put ourselves in a strategically vulnerable position by being too beholden to foreign nations for the resources that we need in our country. But we can do that while protecting the places where we hunt and fish. There is a way to do this, and that is, in fact, the course of action that we're recommending. Again, this report that we're putting out is meant to educate not just the average citizen, but also elected officials and decision makers. And we're engaging the sportsman's community on this issue in particular to ensure that people understand the nexus between the places where they hunt and fish and how it is that their phone turns on every morning when they get up. This is concerning enough to us that we felt it important that we embark in this conversation and ensure that the sportsman's perspective on the issue is heard in the halls of the Capitol and in Washington D.C. Before we head down a path of more mining when there might be alternative courses of action, we want to ensure that that our positions are understood and that decision makers are fully aware of the potential impacts to the places that we hunt and fish and the economic health of this country. Obviously, hunting and fishing and outdoor recreation in the United States is a huge economic industry employing,
Sure. Yep.
Goodness knows how many people. I don't have that number committed to memory, but the annual economic impact of hunting, fishing, and outdoor recreation is in the neighborhood of $100 billion. Excuse me, $800 billion a year. So there is an economic component of this as well, and we all need to be mindful of that. Obviously, if we start developing mineral resources and then cause damage and irreparable harm to the places where Americans hunt and fish, then that also has an economic negative impact as well.
Yeah, when you take $1 trillion, give or take, off the table, I mean, it's going to have an impact for sure. So I'm glad you pointed that out.
You might...
Go ahead, Ty.
Yeah, certainly. You might employ, if we were to develop all these new mines in the United States, you might employ X number of people, but you might put 10 times that many people out of work because resources have been lost. And as I said before, and I know you as a Canadian certainly understand this, that hunting and fishing is part of our heritage in this country, and our public lands in the United States are a treasure. And something that we hold dear to our hearts as a shared natural resource. And so we just need to be very, very mindful as we address this critical minerals issue and supply chain concerns, being very mindful of all of the other components of national security and economic health that are important to all Americans.
Crazy. You know what? You summed that up so nicely. I was going to ask if you had any final words, but I can't even, I don't think you can follow that up with. But I will ask you this. If someone wanted to reach out to you guys or reach out to and get behind what you're doing or support what you're doing, learn more about what you're doing, read your reports, all that sort of stuff, educate themselves, where would they go and do that?
Yeah, that's really important to note. Bear in mind, we're in the process of putting final touches on the report itself. It's going to be released in digital format, and I don't have the URL right now, and I hate to say that, but that's the position I'm in at the moment. Certainly at www.tu.org/critical minerals, critical minerals being plural and one word. We have a website that is launched right now, and I've just given you that URL. Mm-hmm. But as we release the report in digital format, we'll make that available. Additionally, we're going to put out a paper printed report as well that will just simply be the paper version of that, and we will distribute it very, very broadly. We will make it available to as many people as we possibly can, again, with the hopes of educating the masses so that we as a nation can understand the issue, recognize the opportunities that we have, and pursue policies which are meant to address the supply chain concerns and economic and national security concerns, while also being protective of the places where we hunt and fish in this country, cold water habitat, trout salmon habitat, migration corridors for big game, and in particular protected public lands such as wilderness areas.
Absolutely. I'm going to make sure I put all those details, Ty, within the show notes so that people can reach out to you guys there and educate themselves a bit more on this topic. So if there's anything we can do as a podcast to help you guys get your message out, please, by all means, let us know. I can't thank you enough. I know you've educated myself personally today at a very basic level and broke it down to how things affect my life and how it's going to affect me as an individual, not as a country. So I think it's fantastic that you took the time to do that. And I want to thank you guys for all the hard work you guys are doing over there and the big voices and advocation that you have for the places that we love to fish and we take for, I take for granted, and it's people like you that are behind the scenes protecting what I love. So thank you on behalf of the Fly Fishing Insider podcast. And I want to thank the listeners as well. So thanks a lot, Ty.
Well, yeah, thank you, Greg. Thank you very much for helping to share our message with a broader audience, and just really grateful to have this opportunity to share this with your listeners today. And again, this is a topic that will go well into the future. So for many people, they may just be learning of this, but it will certainly be on the radar of many going forward. So thank you for sharing our message and our vision for responsible mining and for helping us get the word out on the course of action that we're pursuing.
Perfect. All right. You've been listening to the Fly Fishing Insider podcast. If you like this podcast episode, please let us know. Leave a review and subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast listening platform.